Today, I have the incredible pleasure to interview one of my favorite all-time authors, Dr. Loretta Breuning. Dr. Loretta Breuning has written several books. She is the author of Habits of a Happy Brain, The Science of Positivity, Tame Your Anxiety, and many more incredible books where she shares her in-depth research and insight into our brain and how it affects our living and our daily life. Loretta is the founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, professor of management at Cal State University East Bay, and the host of the Happy Brain podcast. She's authored so many books. Her books have been translated into Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, French, and Turkish. Her work has been featured on Forbes, NPR, Fox, The Wall Street Journal, NBC, Psychology Today, Cosmopolitan, Men's Health, Fast Company, Dr. Oz, and Real Simple. But what is the most incredible about Loretta is who she is and her incredible way of looking at the human brain and the cause and the root cause of our happiness and our emotions and what drives us. So today, join me in welcoming wonderful Dr. Loretta Breuning.
Thank you so much. That's the best introduction I've ever had.
I'm such an enormous fan of yours. And, you know, everything in my life has been based on your research and on the science that goes within our mind with our chemicals and how it affects our life. So I'm an enormous fan. That makes it easy to do a great introduction. So, you know, it was so difficult to understand what questions to ask because we could talk for hours on so many subjects because you're so well versed. But if you would just start by giving us the background on what led you to get involved in the science of happiness? What started your journey?
Well, the beginning, of course, is always in childhood because that's when our brains are formed. And I think when I was a child, I was surrounded by a lot of unhappiness. And part of me felt like it was my duty to participate in the unhappiness in order to be a good person. But I think on some level, I was like, this is weird. I'm not getting sucked into this. So I think part of me was always looking for a way to not participate in the unhappiness around me. But the actual point where I got started on the research, people around me were always talking about the unhappiness of this or that. And I got interested in the animal brain and why people create unhappiness. And I started reading about the animal brain, and I was amazed to discover that animals have the same chemicals that we have. We think these chemicals cause happiness: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. But what do they do in animals? And when I started looking into it, I saw, oh my goodness, this is so obviously what people are always seeking. And when you know what drives animals to seek them, then it all makes sense. So then I took early retirement to focus on that.
I love that. Would you walk us through the 4 happiness chemicals of the brain and how they work?
Sure. So the ones I focus on are dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. And people have surely heard about them in various places, but no one ever talks about the animal origins and the job that these chemicals are designed to do. Instead, we get the medical model, which gives us the illusion that we're supposed to get them all the time for free, and they should flow effortlessly. And if they don't, then you have a disorder that a doctor can fix. But in the animal world, it's so easy to see the specific job of each chemical. So dopamine is the chemical that motivates you to take a step toward meeting your needs. And it's easy to see if you think about a monkey waking up in the morning and he doesn't have a refrigerator or a supermarket. So in order to relieve his hunger, he has to take action. So he looks around, so he sees something that can meet his needs, and then dopamine turns on, and it's a good feeling that says that will relieve your needs, and it will feel good, and you can get it. And that motivates action. And when the monkey takes a step toward the fruit, then it gets more dopamine and more and more and more. And that's the feeling we're looking for when we look for a way to meet our needs and think, oh, there's something that will meet my needs and I can get it. And then we take action and we get more and more. But the complication is that the minute the monkey grabs the fruit, the dopamine stops. And that's why life has ups and downs, and it's perfectly natural because our brain evolved to motivate seeking. And in the modern world, your belly is full. You don't have to seek food all the time. And that's why we're always seeking something else, or maybe food too, in order to stimulate the dopamine that our ancestors needed just to get through each day.
That's incredible. And how about our serotonin?
So, I should do oxytocin next because
Okay.
serotonin is upsetting to people. So, oxytocin, many people have heard of it as the love hormone or the bonding chemical, and it motivates animals to stick with the herd and seek social support. And we often romanticize this, but the truth is that in the animal world, when you go to the herd, you can lower your guard because instead of worrying about predators every second, you know that you'll get help from others in detecting them. So when you lower your guard, then you can eat. So animals are not trying to lay down their life for others. In fact, they're pushing their way to the center of the herd where others are protecting them from predators. But when they leave that, so then being in a herd is annoying, and we all know that. But then when you leave the herd, your oxytocin falls, and that feels like you're about to be eaten alive. So then you look for a herd again. So we're constantly balancing the urge for being with a group and having social support against the urge for independence. And as frustrating as this can be, it's absolutely natural, and it's a job our brain evolved to do. Now, if you think that you should just have free oxytocin every minute for no reason, oxytocin creates trust, and then you would be trusting people that you shouldn't trust. So instead, you need to know that your brain is designed to make careful decisions about when to trust.
I love that. I love that. Okay, and so now
Now, serotonin. So this is complicated because animals have conflict and competition. And researchers observed the competition among animals for a whole century and wrote books about it that I have collected. But in our century, it has become taboo to acknowledge that animals are hierarchical and competitive and seek social dominance all the time. So the fact is that in the 80s, it was discovered that when an animal gains a dominant position, it gets a little bit of serotonin. So it's not like it's a frozen hierarchy, but it's like each moment, like if I can dominate you, I get serotonin for that moment. Now, it feels so good, but it's not an aggressive feeling. It's a calm feeling because whichever monkey is stronger, that's the one that gets the banana, that gets the mating opportunity, that feels safe because they can meet their needs. And because they feel safe, they don't need to bully the weaker mammals. So this is what allows a troop of monkeys to exist, despite the fact that some are stronger and some are weaker. And this is why we humans are always looking for that serotonin feeling. But the problem is, the minute you get it, it's soon gone, just like all the others. It's not designed to be on all the time for every minute. And as soon as your other needs are met, you have enough food, you have a herd. So then what do you look for? You look for the one-up position, and then it's gone, and so you look for it again. And this is why we humans can drive ourselves crazy over minutia when we really have very good, safe lives compared to our ancestors. And this is why it's so easy to see other people being competitive and petty, but it's so hard to acknowledge that this drive is in yourself. But when you understand it, then you can manage it.
I was going to say it's that unseen piece that really keeps us in danger of repeating the same things and the same behavior over and over. Okay, and our fourth happy chemical.
So the fourth one is endorphin, and this is the body's natural opioid. And it creates a euphoric feeling that masks pain. And we're not designed to have it all the time. It's only triggered by real physical pain. And in the animal world, that makes sense because when an animal is injured, it may need to run to save its life. And endorphin masks pain for about 15 minutes so it can do what it needs to save its life. And then we need to feel pain because that tells us that we need to protect an injury. So humans discovered endorphin before the other happy chemicals. And the example that most people know is runner's high. And it's important to know that runners don't get high every day, but only when they run to the point of pain. And if you chase that high, then you have to sort of abuse your body to get that pain, to get it. And so that's why I'm always very careful to let people know that I am not advocating that we evolved to seek the others, but we did not evolve to seek endorphin. And yet people do seek it because it feels so good. And the more we understand it, the more we can put it into context and find other solutions. And the solution is first to be happy with a small bit of it often rather than to expect a high. And one way to get that is to laugh, because laughing activates deep internal muscles that don't get a lot of action.
I love that. And do you have suggestions on that? Because I literally have invested time going to comedy shows and doing things, and I love to laugh, and I'm graced with a laugh that when I do, it comes from my very stomach all the way up, right? And I love to laugh, but do you have suggestions on what someone can do to cultivate more laughter in their life?
Sure. My book has 3 suggestions, and I'm happy to hear yours if you want. One of them is to have a positive acceptance about your laughter, because many people actually try to suppress their laughter. Usually, you learn that when you were a child. Either you think you got in trouble for laughing because it made it look like you weren't taking things seriously, or because you think you look ugly when you laugh, or something like that. So first, to accept it and know that it's doing you good. So the next thing is to be honest about what makes you laugh. And I always use the example that when friends invited me to things they thought was funny, and thought I was in torture, I hated it. And then I invited friends to things that I thought was funny, and they ruined it for me. I was like, So we have a right to our individual sense of humor, and we really need to give ourselves time and freedom to pursue that rather than to obligate ourselves to sort of go with the herd when it comes to entertainment. And finally, when I'm in a bad mood and I want to watch something, if I start looking at, let's say hypothetically, a Netflix list, when you're in a bad mood, things look bad. And then if you have to go through like 50 different movies and that looks bad, that looks bad, you feel horrible. So don't wait until you're in a bad mood. I call it fill your pantry stock your pantry with uplifting things. So someday when you're in a good mood, go through that list and have a queue of things that are ready to uplift you when you're in a bad mood. So
I love that. It's interesting. I actually, all around my home, I put little plaques or little sayings that lift my spirit. And I even have dishes. I kid you not, I have dishes that have sayings on them, so that each time that I eat a meal, I read this beautiful positive thing, and it does lift my spirit. It's like, even if I'm down, I remember it. So I think, even as silly as that may seem, carefully placed objects around your home or sayings is one way to do it. And then I like what you said about not waiting until you're down. But can you talk to us? I mean, we're living in a time where there's so much depression handled by so many pharmaceuticals, Loretta. And can you talk to us a little bit about what we do when we get in that particular spot in our brain, what we can do to change it or alter it from there?
Sure. And I should mention that I have a series called Stuck at Home, and many people are not stuck at home anymore, but they may still have that feeling. So couple things, we could talk about the happy chemical side and also the unhappy chemical side. So when you're down, so the idea is that we're meant to have ups and downs. So when you're down, I've introduced this concept called neutral. You're not necessarily down in the sense that down is a feeling that you're threatened. It's a survival threat feeling. And once you start feeling threatened, your brain looks around for evidence of threat. Like, you know, if I feel bad, there must be something bad going on. And then you're really good at finding evidence of bad stuff. So the alternative is to say, I'm in neutral. Neutral means nothing great is going on, but that doesn't mean I'm threatened. Now, many people, when nothing great is going on, you have like a vacuum. When you're not distracting yourself with good stuff, the bad stuff whooshes in, and that's really how our brain is designed to work. If you think about a gazelle, it's eating grass, it's hungry, and once its belly is full, what does it do? Lifts its head and looks around for a lion, because that's what you do. You balance between looking for threats and meeting your needs. So the second you meet your needs, you look for another threat. So because our basic needs are met, so we're so good at looking for threats. So it's important to have a plan to how am I going to meet my dopamine needs, my oxytocin needs, my serotonin needs. So to get dopamine, we need a goal, because it's stepping toward a goal that meets your unmet need that activates that excitement, that good feeling. So when many people misuse goals and they dream of being on a mountaintop, and then life is always disappointing because they're not on a mountaintop. And I always use the tabloids as an example, that if you think being a superstar will make you happy forever, the tabloids are scientific evidence that it doesn't work. So, so here's the deal. If you instead have a short-run goal, a long-run goal, and a middle-term goal, then you can always be taking a step toward a goal. And that's all it takes to stimulate your dopamine, is taking one step toward a goal. So when one goal is blocked, you shift to another goal. And a little step triggers a little dopamine, and then you have to take another little step to get more dopamine. That's how it works. Now, serotonin. How can you get a one-up feeling without being a jerk? So if you go around thinking you're more important than everyone, you're going to get some bad consequences. And some people go to the other extreme and they say, well, I'm always going to put myself last because that will be safe. But if you do that, you deprive yourself of serotonin and you don't even know you've done it. It becomes a habit. So the goal is to find safe ways to give yourself a one-up position, and I call it putting yourself up without putting others down. And this is explained in all of my books. And again, you could do it in small steps. Give yourself 5 seconds, 3 times a day, of putting yourself up without putting others down. And many people would say, well, I don't want to applaud myself. I want to be applauded by others. And I discuss this in all of my books, and I have a new book coming out next year, which is totally on this. But a simple answer is that if you looked at people who were prominent in human history, they were not applauded every minute of their lives. They did what they did without applause, and often with attack. And so it's that ability to acknowledge yourself that keeps you going and gives you the strength to do something worthwhile rather than just doing what gets applause in the short run.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such an empty thing, the applause piece, and something that so many people, I feel like almost they were trained to go for that applause, and it only lasts for a moment. And it seems like there's such a difference in internally really letting yourself be proud of what you've accomplished. And I love what you're talking about, with the step by step because I've used that process from you. And it also, I think in our society so full of social media, and people have this impression that they should be happy all the time and that their life doesn't look great compared to all these things people are seeing on social media. But can you talk a little bit about the fallacy of being happy all the time? Because I think that's what causes people at points to think they're depressed. And in actuality, they're feeling neutrality. Neutrality can be a beautiful state to just stay and get comfortable and not having ups and downs that are so dramatic, but getting used to this beautiful peace or neutrality. Talk
Yes,
a little bit
great.
about that, if you would.
Sure, sure. That's a great question. Thank you. That's a question I don't get all the time. And those two parts, and I've already forgotten one part, so let me start the other. So what is great about being neutral? Because that's not obvious, right? So what I think of is if you imagine a monkey is hungry, it finds a fruit, it eats the fruit, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do next? So that's what neutral is. It's like, what am I going to do next? And that's a great place to be, because it's like, instead of always rushing around like, I have to do something, I have to do something, you actually get to decide. You actually get to take a breath and say, what are my priorities? What's the next most important use of my energy? So that's good. Oh, I remember. So the other thing was why people assume that there must be something wrong with them if they're not having this effortless flow of happy chemicals every minute. So yes, you could say part of it is social media, part of it is all those years of those pharmaceutical chemicals that indoctrinated people that the doctor can make you happy every minute. But, you know, before them, there was, you know, a lot of drugs of abuse, and then there's alcohol, and before that, there's always, humans have always looked for something to distract them from the uncomfortable fact that we have this huge brain that is designed to look for evidence of threat, and we will just keep finding evidence of threat as long as we look. So we have to become aware that that's what we're doing, and then consciously like redirect ourselves onto a new track. But you don't even have a new track unless you build it. So it's consciously being aware that you have to build positive expectations, because negative expectations have already gotten built.
Yeah.
So you're only going to have negative expectations unless you consciously build positive expectations. And the other sad fact of life is that you sort of have to do it on your own, because other people are often pretty stuck on their negative tracks. So if you say, if you, as long as you stick with the group, you're going to be negative. So you have to be willing to do it yourself. And that's why I appreciate everyone like you who is not leaving me alone on that track.
It's interesting, you know, I have experienced so many times in my life. I too, I felt like, and I think this is something you and I talked a little bit about, but experiencing happiness was something that was not popular in my family. And it wasn't something that was looked up. But having problems, like if you could bring a problem into the family, that was almost like a gift. And so learning to give myself permission to be happiness in a world where there's so many people that are making a choice to be unhappy was really takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to be happy. I mean, we have even my friend and I in restaurants, people turn around and like, what are you guys so happy about? Why are you laughing? Why are you smiling? But they do want to be a part of that. It's just that it's not as familiar. I'd love to live in a culture where the most familiar thing, right, was that we were all smiling too much.
Yeah. Although who knows, maybe if that were, then we'd say, what's wrong with you?
That's right. What's wrong?
You know we're all going to die?
Well, that's interesting. I was wondering if you would speak a little bit about the science of complaining, because I really have always, and I taught my children, complaining begets complaining, meaning just not to invest your time there. But if you could talk about how that actually wires in the brain, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, you gave me such an amazing example when you said that your parents were almost grateful when someone would bring a problem. So the problem child, as many people have heard this, so first they are helping people distract from some other problem by becoming the problem. And obviously not consciously. And also when you're the problem child, you get rewards. And you would say, well, who wants that kind of reward? You're getting in trouble, but you're the person everybody talks about, you're the person everybody focuses on, you're the center of attention. And even worse, in some cases, you get indulged. Like if you're really nasty, everybody tries to kiss up to you and make you happy. And that is learned on a very deep level. You learn, well, if I'm a jerk, everybody's going to be nice to me. And it's very hard to stop that once it's myelinated. In all of my books, I explain about myelination, which it converts a neural pathway into a superhighway by making it able to conduct electricity a lot faster. And the simple example of myelinated pathways is your native language. So you are not born speaking your native language, but by the time you're 2 years old, it's wired in from repetition because we have a lot of myelin when we're young. Now, if you try to learn a new language in adulthood, it's possible, people have done it, but most people don't do it because it takes so much repetition. And it's the same with your emotions. You wired up your emotional responses when you were very young, and those pathways are so efficient that you can turn on those feelings as easily as finding the word in your native language. But if you try to change your responses, it's as hard as when you study a language and you're like, what's that word? I can't think of it. So that's the experience of trying to use a new pathway that you haven't already developed. And that's the challenge to wire yourself for happiness.
Yeah, that's a interesting one. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you do rewire the brain. And I was graced in my life to have an incredible teacher. And instead of listening to our sad stories and looking at them from the outside, she drove us in to understand how our brain had become patterned and how we were repeating those specific experiences over and over. And that where we had been fooling ourselves is that it was going to turn out different the next time. So if you would talk a little bit about how do we rewire the brain, if you can talk about that process and also the feelings that go along with it and the incredible uncomfortability because it's unfamiliar.
Yes. So first, you're giving me a deja vu about one of the teachers I had who said what you just said. And I was so offended. Like, how dare you tell me that, like, this problem is so real. How dare you tell me, that I'm creating it myself? So, I do empathize with that reaction. And yet we know that that doesn't serve you and that you'll just keep torturing yourself. And you don't want to torture yourself. But our brain is designed to not touch a hot stove twice. So imagine your caveman ancestors and they had to learn not to touch fire. Nobody is born knowing that fire will burn you. But the first time you get burned, it builds a huge pathway in your brain that says, don't go near that again. So that's what we all have from anything that hurt you in the past. It's like, whoa, I'm not going to go there. And so now everything reminds you of something that hurt you in the past. So the only way you can feel good is to build a new pathway. And that's hard, but repetition is what builds it. And it's hard. It takes a lot of repetition. So if you are learning a new language, you can't learn every word at once. So you focus on one word and then another, and you repeat it a lot. So focus on one positive thought or behavior that you like to have and repeat it a lot. Then focus on another positive thought or behavior and repeat it a lot. And when I say positive, though, I focus in my book, The Science of Positivity, realistic is what counts. So a lot of people, what I suggest, it's not to say, I imagine the whole world applauding me. It's like, then you're going to get to this point. So I realized, like, nobody else is getting applause all the time. My life is just like everybody else's. Nothing is wrong with me. Life is frustrating. Monkeys have to work hard for every mouthful of food that they get. And I have to work hard for every mouthful of, whatever I get. It's fine. So that's an example of a realistic positive thought.
Yeah, and the habits, when we talk about the habits of happiness, can you talk a little bit about cultivating happiness? Because I think that people assume that you either are happy or you're not happy. And within that, the sad thing is that leaves happiness really, if we are consistently looking for external happiness, which so many people are taught to do, to your point, whether it's through, it doesn't matter, shopping, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, right?
Applause.
Whatever particular addiction is. Applause is another big one. So if we're taught to look through it those ways, like, can you talk about, because I've always said to people, no one is going to come along and make you and your story okay for you. And they're not going to take an interest in you and invest all of their time helping you to be okay. The good news is that we are empowered to do that for ourselves. That is the incredibly good news, that we can do it. But can you talk about like specific patterns or things that we can do and habits that we can gain and practice through repetition over time that can lead to having you live a happier life?
Sure. Well, a simple answer is that one tiny step is enough to stimulate a happy chemical, as long as you understand the job that the chemicals do. And nobody is getting the chemicals for free. Nobody gets them for nothing. And everyone has this delusion, I have low levels of X. And you just have the assumption that other people are getting it easily. Nobody's getting it easily. Everybody's getting it the same way. You have to take one step towards something that meets your needs. And then when you get it, it's soon gone, and you have to take another step. And the good news in that is that, in the next 5 minutes, you can take a step and get it. So then they say, well, what step is that? So I think of a step for each of the chemicals. For dopamine, I always use the example that if I have a horrible mess on my desk or in a drawer somewhere, and every day I'm frustrated with this mess, but I never do anything about it. If I set a timer for 5 minutes and work on that mess for 5 minutes, I feel great after. But it's hard to start the minute you look at why is that mess on your desk? Because each thing in that pile reminds you of something horrible. But once you start and you get that good feeling, it's like, wow, this is great. So maybe you want to continue, or maybe you just want to do it for 5 minutes a day. But whatever it is, you give yourself the knowledge that you can stimulate a feeling of accomplishment, which is dopamine. Now, for oxytocin, the simple step is to build social trust, because that's what a mammal is looking for. And it goes both ways. But I can't control other people's trust. I can only control myself. But it wouldn't be good for me to just trust everybody. So the simple example I use is, let's say you have a neighbor that you don't get along with. And if you buy that neighbor a car, that's not going to make them a different person. So many people have this idea that some big giant gesture is the solution. But no, it's a lot of small steps. So every day, make a small step toward one person and a small step toward a different person the next day. And over time, you'll see that they will take a small step toward you, but you can't expect it to come in a controllable way. So just keep doing it, and you'll keep giving yourself little bits of oxytocin. And finally, serotonin, we talked about that, how you can keep giving yourself the one-up position by recognizing your own accomplishments. And people want to talk about gratitude, but this is a little different because many people have gratitude for things that they have no control over, and they never appreciate themselves for what they've done. So maybe for 30 seconds, 3 times a day, stop and applaud yourself for something you did.
Oh, Loretta, I love that. It's interesting. You know, I was an executive for years, and one of the things that I had to realize about myself is I would not stop, and I would not ever take the time to celebrate some of the things that I was doing. I mean, I could look back at the career, but when I really had the realization that by my not doing it, as a leader, I was leading others to not do it. By always driving for the next point or the next thing that we're doing, the next project, I wasn't doing it. And so I really had to literally write it on my desk. And I did that 3 times a day. And celebrate a win. And then I would actually call another to share what the win was. Because it was difficult for me to ever go outside of myself and ask for help or ask for that applause. So that,
well, not only that, the other person often thinks you're showing off. So how did you do that?
Well, and you know what, I think in a way where I've always learned that, you know how you talk about the step towards other people, is I really do pay attention and focus on what others are doing and their contributions. And so I have always led that conversation by sharing with a member of my team what I saw them contributing to the day, whether it was an attitude or what it was. And then I shared with them very authentically that I had trouble celebrating my own wins, and that this is one of the things today that I saw that I actually had done well. And it's just a really nice moment to have with people.
Yeah.
So I love that you say that. I think it's difficult sometimes too, and especially sometimes for women, we're just going to the next and the next and the next instead of taking that time. And that has a lot to do with self-care and self-love. When I do it, it also helps alleviate some of my anxiety. And I know that, you know, we could talk to you forever because you are so well versed on so many things, but we do see a lot of anxiety, especially in our current condition in the world. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about a step that we can take to help us in those most anxious moments, just what to do.
So I have a book called Tame Your Anxiety, and I talk about a simple 3-step process. So the first step for 60 seconds is to think about, what do I want in this moment? To be real about what you really want instead of denying that you want it. Because when you're frustrated and upset, your inner mammal is always trying to survive. It wants something. And if you make it taboo to want something, then your inner mammal is always going to feel like life is horrible, like it's unfair, I can never get what I want. But you're the one that made it that you can never get what you want. And also that tells you that if it were a real emergency, you know, if this had been a real emergency, so that gives you time to distinguish between, is this a real emergency or is it just a frustration because I'm projecting into the future, I will never get what I want. Then the second step is to spend 20 to 40 minutes doing something you like. And the reason is that cortisol, the unhappy chemical, it stays in your body. It has a half-life of 20 minutes. And during that time, its job is to make you feel bad, because that's what it takes when a gazelle is eating grass and it smells a lion. It would rather keep eating grass. So cortisol does its job by making you feel so bad that you can't do anything but focus on the threat. So when your cortisol is released because you are associating your present with something that burned you in the past, then that cortisol is going to be physically in your bloodstream. And every 20 minutes, in 20 minutes, it's down to half. Another 20 minutes, you've gotten rid of 3/4 of it. So most people, they think, when I feel bad, I got to do something good for me. oh, I'll exercise and eat kale. Well, that's not going to make you happy when you're feeling crappy to exercise. You know, you want to do something enjoyable. So you can exercise and eat kale another time. But now, I'm not saying to go to the other extreme and just eat ice cream, and then if you still feel bad, eat another ice cream. So you tried that, that didn't work. So what else is there? Is to have a pantry full of ideas, things you can do that feel good, that don't have bad long-run consequences. And so one example I use of that I always liked is to listen to comedy, and again, to have that ready, or I watch wildlife videos. I listen to things in a foreign language because that sucks my brain in, so I cannot worry because I have no brain cells left to worry with. And many people do it. So a physical activity like, if you're just running, you can worry while you run. So you need to keep your brain busy. But if you keep your body and your brain busy together, like when you play the piano or garden, those are examples. Or if you exercise, but you're able to keep your brain from angry thoughts while you're exercising.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And it's interesting. I absolutely love the correlation. Everything you're talking about really comes down to knowing thyself and learning to care for yourself. And it is so individual. What works for me and makes me happy is not what works for the next person or makes them happy. So part of the process, I think, is this investigation. And I've gone through and done that work where what is it for me personally? And then investing my time in those things, and to your point, those people that actually help with that feeling. And it's important that we learn to take care of ourselves. And especially, I know there's so many of us that are leading very busy lives as women, as business people, right? As moms. And so it's imperative to find things when it only takes a moment. It's
Yes.
not that it takes a long time. I love that you talk about that. It's like you talk about it in 25 seconds.
I forgot the third step. So the first step was 60 seconds. The second step was 20 minutes or up to 40 minutes. And the third step, another 60 seconds, is to think of your next step and take it. And first, people may say, well, how can you take a next step in 60 seconds? And the idea is you can debate your next step forever. So if you don't put a timer on for 60 seconds, you're never going to go into action. And if you can't do it right now, you have to put it on your calendar and plan in 60 seconds exactly what you're going to do. But what I explain is that if you were a gazelle, you live in a world of lions, there's always going to be a threat. You can never say, I'm not going to go out until they make a threat-free world. You have to take that next step. And what gives a gazelle peace in a world where it can be eaten alive is it has confidence in its next step. And once you take that next step, you can be confident in your next step.
Loretta, you are, to me, an incredibly courageous woman. And you made a choice instead of sitting in your circumstances and letting your circumstances own you, to go out and do the research and find a way to own your own circumstances. That takes a lot of courage, and more generously, you share with all of us through your amazing books, through your podcast, through your website. There's so many free tools on Loretta's website. I invite you, the website is right down below, as is a free gift from Loretta for all of you. Anxiety, what turns it on, what turns it off, and my 5-day happy chemical jump start that she has for all of you. But
Thank
God,
you.
she's been an amazing resource in my life. And I invite you to have an understanding. Once you understand what's driving some of your emotions and behavior, I think you'll start to understand that you can choose to have things different in your life, and that it's worth the work and it's worth the repetition to make things different. So Loretta, is there any final thought you would like to leave us with today?
You know, I was just thinking about what you said about it's never enough. No matter what you do, you feel like it's not enough. For people to understand that that's a dopamine thing. Like as soon as you climb to the top of a mountain, it's like, well, that feels good. How can I feel good again? Oh, I guess I got to climb another mountain. So everyone has that. And when you know how your brain works, then you don't blame society, you don't blame your partner, and you just say, well, I don't have to climb another mountain. That's one possible way to feel good. And I can choose to do that, or I could choose to experiment with other ways to feel good. And all it takes is the first step.
Oh, Loretta, thank you so much for being here
Sure.
with us today.
Thank you so much for understanding it all.